Hi friends, I'm answering the Read Smart tag today, and this was created by Emily from Prose and Petticoats and Ruben from To Readers It May Concern. I think their purpose in creating it was to give people advice on how to read smarter or more seriously, but I think I'm going to answer the questions like a lot of people have been, where they're just giving their personal answers. So yes. So the first question is, what is your strategy to stay focused and engaged while reading? So something that I got in the habit of is reading with headphones in and sort of concentrating against music that I am very familiar with because in my 20s I lived in a lot of one-bedroom apartments with my husband and we are both the kind of people that will have something on in the background most of the time, so music or a stream or something like that. And I never liked the idea of being in a different room for a very long time for the amount of reading that I wanted to get in. And so what I kind of forced myself to learn to do was to listen to music with headphones in and concentrating that way. And I've been doing that for a really long time. I still do that a lot, even though I live in a townhouse now and there's a lot of room to go somewhere more secluded and quiet to read. But a lot of times it's just nice to be around other people and be able to read. For me. There are other kinds of reading that I like to do, and I will talk about those I think in the next question. So especially now that I have noise canceling headphones, it's pretty easy to concentrate. But I think it's funny, some people need very soft music or no lyrics. I like music with lyrics and I like it to be upbeat because I'm the kind of person that is very often sleepy. I get enough sleep in terms of hours, but I don't know, I'm just the kind of person that is very often a little sleepy and I will start nodding off. And so having a little bit more upbeat going kind of helps me stay awake. But yes, I think the biggest thing is that when I'm choosing to read that way, I am open to having a little bit of distraction. It's not the most 100% zoned in kind of reading, but it makes me happy. I like doing it that way. Number 2, how does your personal environment influence your focus and what can you do to optimize it? So I don't always optimize it, to be honest. There was a time when I was a lot more concerned with the idea of really optimizing my reading, but I've become a lot more comfortable with being kind of not too concerned about maximizing anything. I think like a lot of people, I have a lot of distractions around me throughout the day, and so some of the most productive reading times for me are in the morning and at night. I can't do the thing where I wake up early to read. I'm jealous of people who can do that. If I wake up early to read, I'm sleepy and I'm not paying enough attention to what I'm reading. But I do love reading while I'm having breakfast. I think that's one of my favorite times to read. This year, that time slot in the day has been my dedicated reading time for War and Peace, because I'm doing a slow read of War and Peace. And so I started out with 1 chapter, but I've actually bumped it up to 2. And it's one of my favorite things in my day. It's just become routine and it's so enjoyable. It's taught me that I actually really enjoy having some kind of slow read going, and I might continue that habit in future years. But also nighttime is a very consistent time for me to get some reading in. Even if I don't manage to get a lot more reading during the day, I always read at least a little bit at night. And yes, I get sleepy very quickly, very often, but it's still a very consistent time. So even if I only get a few pages in, it's still good and it works. And another instance that is one of my favorite times to read is on the weekends. I always sleep in on the weekends, but my cat always wakes me up because his food time in the morning tends to be at a time when I am not ready to get out of bed yet, but I'll go feed him, and then when I get back in bed, I am a little bit awake, and so I'll get some reading in at that point. And sometimes it's a lot of reading, and sometimes it's only a little bit, but it's so cozy and nice. I always end up getting a little sleepy eventually. I take a nap and then wake up later in the day, and it is blissful. I love it so much. The other thing that tends to distract me a lot while I'm reading is just my mind telling me I should look up this and that, or write down this, chore I need to do, or whatever. And so the most helpful thing I can do is to write it down. Just make a note on my phone or on a notepad or just something to get it out of the way, because otherwise it'll keep pestering me and keep me from concentrating. And so yeah, I can't ignore it. I have to write it down, and then I can let it go. Number 3, what methods do you use to retain and recall information from what you've read? I'm pretty terrible at retaining information from books. I will forget any and all details. It leaves my mind very quickly after I finish a book. But honestly, recalling information about a book has never been that much of a priority for me. Remembering my thoughts about the book and feelings about the book are something that I'm a lot more interested in. And so something that I started doing at the beginning of this year is I started a reading journal where I write down my thoughts after I'm done reading. But also writing my thoughts out as I'm reading has become a huge part of my, reading routine. So in notebooks, or actually on my notes app on my phone, I have started doing that a lot, writing out thoughts as I'm reading, and I'm enjoying that so much. So I'm actually terrible at remembering what happens in books. And honestly, before starting a channel, it wasn't really a concern at all to try to remember what happens in books. Now it seems helpful to remember to be able to give synopses of books, but I can always look up that information. I think for me, I appreciate being able to remember my thoughts and feelings about books though. And so this year, one thing that I started doing is I am keeping a reading journal. And so I definitely write out my thoughts on what I've read once I've finished reading. But then another part of it is I've started keeping notes on my, thoughts and musings and things as I'm reading in my notes app. That's become a very go-to thing for me. And I think it's really helped me deepen my takeaways. And I'm just really enjoying doing that. I would really like to keep it very natural, if I'm not inclined to write out thoughts about what I'm reading, then I won't. But maybe because it's very new, I'm just really enjoying doing it all the time. So yes, it's really helping me be able to express my thoughts on what I'm reading so that I can talk to you guys on, my booktube channel. But also it just feels very enriching in general, because it's something that I've wanted to be able to do, is just explain my thoughts and feelings a lot better about books. Number 4, how do you approach difficult or challenging material? So I'm assuming this means books that are maybe experimental in their form or have complex material that requires more attentive kind of reading or analysis or imagination to get more out of the book. And I think this is the way that I generally approach all books, but if I know that something is meant to be complex, especially, I try to go in pretty open-minded to letting the experience be whatever it ends up being. I think a lot of challenging books are the kind of books that are made to be reread more than once. And more recently too, I like the idea of, if I know that something is going to be challenging, looking up just a little bit of information about it so I can go in with some expectation. So I might do like a little bit of research and just get a sense of the themes or anything related to the genre that might be helpful to give me just a little bit of an expectation going in. But other than that, really, I like to go in with my normal level of critical thinking and taking notes, developing my thoughts and all that. Don't always do it, but I think it can be very helpful. But yes, on a first read, I tend to not go in very prepared and let the experience be whatever it ends up being. Like I mentioned with War and Peace, I'm doing the slow read, and that's a great way to approach something that maybe is intimidating, especially because of the length. That's a great way to read a book like that. Spend your time with it, really kind of savor it. Honestly, if I just get very curious about certain things, I don't mind doing research in the middle of reading something. to develop my understanding, or, learning more about things that it might be referencing and things like that. Or after the fact, looking up interviews or looking up discussions. I don't think this is really a difficult book, but I saw Sean from Sean Breathes Books. He actually had a video discussion with some other literary people, and they discussed Summer by Edith Wharton, which I read last month, and it just popped up in my feed, and I was so excited to watch that. And I didn't read it with anybody else, but it almost felt like it was almost like the kind of discussion that you end up having with people when you do a buddy read or something like that. And so that felt really nice, and I didn't really plan it, but it made me feel like what a great thing to look for after you read something to get even more out of it. Obviously doing an actual buddy read is great, but if you don't have another live person to do that with, then looking for discussions like that is a great way to enrich your own experience as well. Number 5, what role do note-taking and annotation play in your reading process? I love annotating. In physical books, I like to underline with pencil and then also write down little notes like thoughts, sometimes, more kind of thought out sentences, and sometimes just little reactions like a word or a little heart or a star, things like that. Little reactions and things that I know future me will see at some point. I don't typically tab or dog ear books or anything. I am tabbing War and Peace as I go. I think because it's so long, it just felt appropriate maybe to do that, because then, once I'm done with it, when I go back to it, I can just very easily find a page that has some, meaningful things in there for me to look back on, and I can find those spots. But yes, usually I don't tab, just underline and little notes. On ebooks, I like to highlight. It is so easy to look back on those highlights in ebooks, so that's great. I might take notes, but nowhere near as much as I do in books, because it's, they're not right there. You have to click on it, so typically I don't do that. And like I mentioned, taking notes has become a big part of my process in developing my thoughts and opinions on books, and yeah, it's a very enjoyable part of the process as well. Number 6, how do you balance reading for pleasure with reading for personal or professional development? So I don't feel like there's anything to balance really, because it all ends up being for enjoyment anyway. Like if I'm reading something art practice or art theory related, or I do like to read psychology books sometimes, those end up being for enjoyment anyway, and so there's no difficulty in feeling like there's a balance between those. So yeah, I just approach everything the same way, open-minded but also critical, and how much I annotate and how many notes I take, it's really just on a case-by-case basis. So yeah. Number 7, what is the importance of setting reading goals? So I do set some goals, but their priority is pretty low. I mentioned in my vlog that I do not set number goals. I don't like focusing on numbers or speed. I'm in it for the enjoyment, and so I want no pressure whatsoever. But I do really enjoy making lists of books and authors that I would like to maybe get to during the year. And I like to check in on my list throughout the year a few times. And it's really helpful because I might forget, and it just reminds me and gives me ideas to fill in gaps in my reading throughout the year. It also reminds me of books that are on my shelves that I haven't gotten to, which I'm pretty good about. I don't have a ton of books that I haven't read on my shelves, but it reminds me to not forget about them. Number 8, what are some strategies for overcoming reading slumps or lack of motivation? A huge thing for me has been getting comfortable with DNFing. I remember years ago, it was not a common practice in booktube for people to give up on books. I remember it being kind of a pronounced thing that a lot of booktubers would not give up on books. And I feel like that's a very personal thing. that's totally fine if you really feel that way, but I personally wish that I hadn't paid so much attention to that, because I forced myself to finish a lot of books that just weren't worth finishing for me. So nowadays I have a very open policy for DNFing. But yeah, so nowadays I am very open to DNFing. It keeps me from slumping. It keeps me from feeling negative and not wanting to be reading. And the thing is, I'm the kind of person that second guesses themselves quite a bit sometimes. So it has really helped me not feel guilt about giving up on books, to write out my thoughts and to understand what it is that I am thinking and feeling about what I'm reading, so that I understand the reason that I am maybe not enjoying or connecting with a book, and it's very clear to me that I should give up on it and move on to something else. And that's been really great, because I can look back on books that I have DNF'd on Goodreads, and when I see that list, I feel no remorse. It's just personally, I would rather be reading something else. And there's no regret. The other thing, like many people, I tend to have at least 2 to 3 books going at the same time. Usually an audiobook and any other kind of ebook or physical book. I honestly don't always worry too much about having different genres. I know that can be very helpful. I don't always pay attention to that, but having different books, with different things going on, keeps my interest up, and I can just switch between them and not lose interest in reading that way. But I do actually think it's a great idea to take breaks or to slow down your reading at times. I have a lot of hobbies, and making time for other hobbies when I'm feeling myself not as interested in reading makes me very happy, but also it naturally makes my interest in reading increase. So yeah, it's never a bad idea to go ahead and do that. So that's it. Those are all my answers. I hope you enjoyed watching. And if you would like to be tagged, please consider yourself tagged. And let me know if you do this tag so I can watch your video for it. Yes, so thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.